country. But even at the tactical level, our coalition's psychological operations teams are very effective and are having impact on the battlefield. In a recent Fifth Corps engagement, as an example, this was against elements of the Nebuchadnezzar Division when we first made contact a few days ago. Iraqi forces were encouraged to surrender by way of loudspeaker broadcasts. And these are tactical teams with loudspeakers mounted on top of their vehicles. A total of 67 Republican Guard troops surrendered to coalition forces, 10 of them surrendering to the psychological operations team itself. These teams work up close with the combat forces in the front lines, close enough in one case to have the loudspeaker knocked off the top of the vehicle during a firefight. The coalition advance continues forward to the objective of removing the regime. In the wake of these operations are the equally important efforts to start Iraq's future now. I have a few photos for you to show some of our medical and civil affairs actions that have occurred, in this case, near Al-Nasiriyah, a town that we have all talked about a lot over the last several days. This shows a team in place doing medical assessments and also, in this particular image, distributing food and water to the people who were only days ago threatened by the brutality of the regime. We currently hold over 4,500 enemy prisoners of war, and we treat them according to the Geneva Convention. These next images show that the International Committee of the Red Cross has visited the coalition prisoner camps near Qasr. We're also building an additional camp, and the last images show the ongoing construction of the new internment facility.
It is still very much underway. When I say U.S. troops are in the city of Najaf, they are not everywhere in Najaf. They are controlling certain parts of the outskirts. In fact, they say they don't need to occupy the city of Najaf to control the Fedayeen fighters, to make sure that those Fedayeen fighters don't create any more problems for them. They need to control some strategic areas. So it is entirely possible, and I don't know this one way or the other, that they will not occupy the entire city. But they do plan to try and control the movement of those Fedayeen fighters. Jim?
Ad is today back on in earnest. The Shia holy city of Kerbala now encircled by US infantry as they push on towards the capital. There'd been fears of a new drawn-out battle to seize the perimeter of the city, but in the end resistance was much lighter than expected. A nighttime assault completed in under 3 hours. The battle opened up a potential choke point in the road, but with the strategic Kerbala gap now clear, it's one-way traffic.
Now we're about probably about 7 clicks north of the Kerbala Gap. We just went through the Kerbala Gap, had a firefight, through past the EPWs there and some of the burning vehicles and stuff, heading towards our next attack position and get set for further combat operations.
EPWs, or enemy prisoners of war, may have been taken here, but to the east of these infantrymen, the fighting would appear to have been far bloodier. Allied forces claim to have wiped out an entire division of Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard near the town of Kut. Some Allied units now reported to be just 30 miles from the capital. Having bridged the River Tigris, Baghdad is now within coalition artillery range.
This is the very beginning of the push. The goal is to overthrow the Iraqi regime and to free this country of its weapons of mass destruction and bring liberation to the Iraqi people. And this is the first major push toward Baghdad to reach that end.
Despite the push northwards and the destruction caused by massive aerial bombardment, areas behind them remain in enemy hands. They include parts of Najaf, where coalition commanders say militias loyal to Saddam Hussein are firing from the gold-domed Ali Mosque, one of Islam's holiest shrines. Tim Wilcox, BBC News.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, you can see behind me Marines from 4-2 Commando. They've just been brought in by Chinook helicopter. They've obviously been out on patrol and they're coming back to their base this evening. 2 Chinook helicopters just dropped them in a few moments ago, and just against the sort of setting sun you can see them coming back into their camp. They're on patrol across a wide area of southern Iraq, and I guess there are about 100 of them, maybe 50 probably on each RAF Chinook helicopter that landed. Obviously still wearing sort of their camouflage on their faces, you can probably see from where I am now. And also their cartridges, they're carrying their cartridges, they're full of small arms fire, so for their rifles, the SA-80 rifles that they're carrying with them. And they're just going across the border point now, and you can probably hear the cheers and the whoops, and those are from the young children who gather at this checkpoint all the day. And I think that picture probably tells its own sort of story, that there's a kind of relaxed atmosphere, and it's quite jovial almost. The children, I think, are driving the military police who are guarding the checkpoint mad. For the first 3 or 4 days they were trying to make friends with them, and then afterwards I think they'd like to wring their necks, frankly, because they're forever coming up demanding chocolate, demanding sweets, doing everything that every child ever does, clambering on the back of lorries that are moving as they come past the checkpoint and then have to be got off the lorries. But it's a very different atmosphere from the one that there was maybe a week, 10 days ago, when it was still very tense in Qasr and there was still sporadic fighting. That said, I must say I heard a crump of artillery being fired about half an hour ago that seemed to be coming. It was very hard to locate exactly, but probably 5-10 kilometers away. And these soldiers are now going back to their barracks for the evening before they'll probably be out on patrol again tomorrow. Now, being carried out on a stretcher. Of course, she's been very badly injured in the incident. We understand that she has suffered 2 broken legs. She's got a broken arm, and she suffered gunshot wounds in the incident. And she's said to be in a stable condition now, and obviously in West Virginia they're just waiting to welcome her home. Apparently she has managed to get a phone call home after she was taken out from this hospital in Nasiriyah, where she was being held as a prisoner of war. 19-year-old female. It's a story that I think that will, have gripped the American people as they woke up to it this morning or heard it on the late bulletins last night.
They unleashed a deafening barrage that shook the ground. This barrage is being fired right into the center of Basra. It's intended as a show of force to wear Iraqi's military down. Intensely bright lights, each the power of 1 million candles, mushroomed over the city to illuminate specific buildings where it's now known Saddam's men are holding out. 1120. In the last few hours, the Iraqis have fired back mortars. British tanks have responded. This is the urban warfare Britain wanted to avoid. British troops say the Iraqi military is taking cover in civilian compounds. They only hit them when they come out.
We're hitting the correct targets. They've not caused any civilian casualties so far, so it's a bonus for us.
Inside the control center, intelligence was coming in.
News just in reports that the Iraqi Air Force is prepared for chemical bombardment in northern Basra.
These threats come almost day by day now. Chemical weapons haven't yet been used, but the troops here all have gas masks at the ready. The British say they're winning this battle for Basra, but so do the Iraqis. The losers are the civilians cowering inside. Hilary Anderson, BBC News.
What that is, a convoy of 2 or 3 pickup trucks were moving through an intersection at the same time that a U.S. military convoy was coming from a different road. A chance encounter. The pickup trucks opened fire on the U.S. military convoy. The U.S. military convoy backed up, took a head count, returned fire, and called in some Apache attack helicopters. Those are the AH-64 helicopters we've been watching buzzing around over the city all day. Now, they're not out here right now. Looks like they've gone home, but they did fire on those pickup trucks. At least 2 of the 3 we can be sure of they fired on. And this is the result. Now, inside of the Apache, inside those pickup trucks, they had mortars and rocket-propelled grenades. And the reason we know that is because just after the Apaches hit them with probably with Hellfire missiles, there were a lot of secondary explosions. Those secondary explosions went on for 5-10 minutes, and what that is more munitions, more UXO exploding. We basically saw it happen there. That's why that black smoke is still coming out of there. They could see when they had this chance encounter, some soldiers that were in that convoy could see that the pickup trucks, the rear area, the cargo area of those pickup trucks had been covered up in some camouflage and wheat, believe it or not. But it hadn't been camouflaged that well because they could see some of the rockets beneath it. And obviously, those vehicles weren't camouflaged quite well enough because obviously the Apache attack helicopters caught up with them. Jim?
On Jeff, a little bit earlier, Ryan Chilcote says this was a spontaneous demonstration as some of the U.S. forces began moving into the city. This was actually a small group of those forces that were on their way to the Ali Mosque. They wanted to talk with religious leaders, not only to assure them, but to discuss with them the best way of interacting with the local.
The operation started overnight, the first major battles between the American 3rd Infantry Division and the Republican Guard. The Americans weren't seizing the city of Karbala, but bypassing it and pressing forward. What began as a series of probing attacks is now a main force offensive across 2 fronts and against 3 divisions of the Republican Guard. The balance of forces strongly favors the Americans. Civilians held at gunpoint as the barrage continued.
The battles in Karbala and Al-Qut are the most significant battles to date, as they are the battles as we approach Baghdad. This is the continuing effort and the next major step to bringing down the regime.
The Republican Guard resisted. In this skirmish, which lasted for several hours, 1 American soldier was killed and many Iraqis. A member of this armored unit said it wasn't the kind of warfare they trained for at their base in Kansas.
These are desperate people doing desperate things in order to survive, and they're throwing everything they've got at us.
In the Tigris Valley, advancing from the east, the U.S. Marines claim to have destroyed the entire Baghdad division of the Republican Guard. Advance units here may be only 20 miles from Baghdad.
They're going to secure the base of the bridge on this side of the Tigris, and then Lima's going to push across and secure the far side. As soon as that's accomplished, the rest of the division will start rolling through.
The Americans are now across the Tigris and the Euphrates, and the plan may be to cut off what remains of the Republican Guard and destroy it. The Basra front has been quieter, with the British maintaining their checkpoints outside the city. As a result of an accident to a light armoured vehicle, the number of British deaths in the campaign has risen to 27. Martin Bell, 5 News.
Infantry, which is a combat battalion of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division. And while the Bradley fighting vehicles that you see behind me are stopped for right now, this large force is now flowing north. Its mission is to attack Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard forces to the south of Baghdad. Essentially what's happened is that there are other forces ahead of us, part of the 3rd Infantry Division, which is this large mechanized division, 20,000 soldiers, 250 tanks. And what they're doing is they're cutting off routes of access that the Iraqis might have to reinforce these Republican Guard positions to the south of Baghdad. There have been reports about Iraqi units, Republican Guard forces from Tikrit moving to the south, Saddam Hussein's hometown, moving from the north to the south. They want to block those avenues of arrival, if you will, so that Saddam Hussein cannot reinforce these forces, which have been very heavily degraded. There are 2 Iraqi Republican Guard divisions, which are the armored divisions to the south of Baghdad. One, according to U.S. military intelligence sources, has been degraded to about 1/3 by the heavy U.S. bombing campaign. The other to about 2/5, or about 40%. So within a matter of hours, this large mechanized force is set to launch the main attack against those Republican Guard forces. Interestingly enough, we're also getting some reports from Iraqi prisoners of war who claim that they're getting advice from former Russian military officials about how to respond to the American strikes. The American forces aren't terribly concerned about that. They believe that they've caught the Iraqis with the Marines moving from the east and the Army moving from the west in a sort of pincer movement, and that within a matter of hours, if not days, those Republican Guard forces will be destroyed, and that these forces will then point their weapons to the north and be very quickly Army on the outskirts of Baghdad.
A police station in southern Iraq stands a mural of this country's leader. He sees himself as the benign father of the nation. Royal Marines from Alpha Company 40 Commando go inside the police station. There may be important clues here about local militia groups. Saddam Hussein's dreaded internal security police were based here. Saddam's portrait adorned every room. Not anymore. Weapons are found, also maps and documents. And downstairs, cells. This one barely 4 feet by 8 with no windows and a filthy pillow and mattress. In other rooms, hooks hang from the ceiling. This room is bare but for 2 old tires and an electricity cable. We are later told a torturer might use the tires to stand on while water is poured on the floor and the prisoner electrocuted. And in this room are the identity cards of scores of Iraqi men, aged between 20 and 40. It's a crime here not to have your ID card with you at all times. Why do these men no longer need theirs? Just after we left the police station, some Iraqis looted the building. It was a place many feared until now. In the distance, the smoke rises from a battlefield. Iraq's tools of repression are being taken away. Clive Myrie in Abu al-Qasib.
We've been called up basically because there's thousands of regular army drivers who are stuck in the UK in case of a fire strike. So I suppose we've got Andy Gilchrist to blame really for us being out here. I can think of better places to be. It's hot, it's dusty, there's loads of flies. Company's good though. The regulars have accepted us in really well. I was very surprised actually. So that sort of kept morale up.
I've seen a few sites that I'd rather I didn't see. It's a bit of a culture shock. You watch the news on the telly and you see like Baghdad and Basra, the town. It looks quite a nice place, but when you're coming up through the border, through the sand, and you see the homelessness and the poverty and what people really are suffering, you think that sitting watching in the house watching the telly that it's not that bad. It really is. It's a major culture shock to me personally.
It's a bit scary, but it gets less scary as we go on. First crossing the border was terrifying, and every day you get more used to all the bangs and things, and you realise that they're outgoing, they're not incoming.
A TA is a hobby for us, and then all of a sudden to get lumbered into this, it's unbelievable really.
My friends think I'm absolutely crazy for coming out here in the first place. My personal family, my mum and my dad, they're really worried. My girlfriend, she was devastated.
I never ever imagined that we would have compulsory call-up, so it was a bit of a shock. But then again, it's an experience that you're not going to get a chance to have again.
You join the army, the TA, and for a laugh, it's the morale's there. You don't expect to get called up, but at the same time, it's a point that they make to you when you join. If there's a war, they maybe use you, and it's something that you sign in a dotted line for, and I'm very proud.
Finally, American bombing has broken the Iraqi defense line on the northern front. Overnight, warplanes pounded the northeastern approaches to the city of Mosul. In daylight, we were able to move forward through positions and past bases which the Iraqi army had hastily abandoned. Then vehicles started racing past us, and we heard the sound of gunfire. Very suddenly, firing has broken out just down the road ahead of us, where we had been told that the Iraqi army had pulled back. Then, a moment later, it started from behind us over there. We simply don't know at the moment who is firing who, but what we have seen on the road here is clear evidence of American airstrikes on a fleeing Iraqi army. The retreating Iraqis were blasted from the air. A rocket landed beside this truck and shredded it. The airstrikes were called in by US Special Forces troops, part of the small American contingent on the northern front. But Kurdish soldiers also played an important part. For the first time, they engaged the Iraqis and helped to drive them back. The Iraqis have